know that you lost some mentors and some close friends this past year. I mean, not that I
Yeah.
want to talk about those in detail, but we were talking about how does one deal with so much loss, and there's been so much loss
Yeah.
in this year.
Right. So just, I know, the spiritual connection to all this. I'm thinking about, and I don't mind. You don't need all the details, but in the course of this year, the rabbi who inspired me to be a rabbi died. One of my longest friends, by the way, named Sam Lieberman, he was actually at my wedding, like you were. He died. A few months after Rabbi Shapiro died, his 59-year-old son, Steve, one of my dearest and closest friends in the world, died. A woman named Elise, who was my youth group advisor, died. A woman, Steve, and that we went to rabbinical school with and sat in classes with us, she died. And, it's sort of managing through that and holding it all while I'm tending to a congregation that has experienced more loss than we've ever experienced before. I'm in a congregation about 250, 260 families. In a normal year, I probably do, we'll say 10 funerals. Since the start of COVID, we've had like more than 20 people who've died who are either part of our congregation or one degree away from the congregation. And 250 families, a rabbi like me. And so it's managing my own grief. It's tending to families who need their rabbi and congregation to be there for them in an environment where none of us are used to dealing with any of these things the way we have to deal with them. And we're kind of making it up as we go along and trying to find what's most important to find our way through. It's been profound. It's been rabbi changing.
Yeah, I want to come back to that as in a second. But one of the things that you and I were observing is that, we have had Shiva minions in our own homes on a regular basis because of how we're leading Shiva during COVID. So there hasn't been like the separation, like I'm going to someone else's house. It's actually been present in our own homes in a way that it's never been before in the 30 years that we've been rabbis.
Laura, my wife, right, has heard me say dozens of times. Over the years, she's heard me say probably thousands of times, I'm going to do a Shiva minyan. This year, she would hear me say, I'm going to do a Shiva minyan, and I stand up from our living room and I walk upstairs to this office,
Right.
And I'm doing a Shiva minyan. It's like right here. There is no separation, right? But to your larger question, right there's no separation between what it means to be a rabbi, being there for other, and what it means to be a mourner in my own home with the own loss that I've experienced. So it is just sort of compounded and been kind of a pile of sadness, right? Whether it's sadness from the congregation, sadness from my own personal life, and then Shiva minyan. By the way, for we're finally back in our building leading services. We're still not in person, but it wasn't only that, right? It's on Friday nights reading Shiva lists, Kaddish lists from my home.
Right.
It's making the phone call to the mourner from my home. It's calling my brother to talk about the sadness I'm feeling from losing our rabbi from my home, right? So all of this has sort of just settled in this space, and it's right. It's been hard to separate, right? It all just sort of like, and listen, I'm not alone. You're not alone in all this. I know that people who are listening have their own whatever it is that's come upon them. So it's recognizing the reality of what's been, and then also thinking about, okay, what do we do to kind of get through this, right? Because you can't just sit in all that heaviness.
Yeah, I think, and as you're saying that, one of the things that occurs to me is, when Shiva concludes, what are you supposed to do? You get up from your home and you go out, and you go for a walk, and and almost like the inability to do that, to the fact that it's constantly hovering over the home, makes it almost impossible to make that separation, and to sort of leave it over here. I'm not saying you can ever you ever leave the sadness, but you do need to kind of figure out where to put it, and it's almost like there's no place to put it right now.
Right. Especially when you're the rabbi, right? Because when Shiva for one of my friends ended literally at 7:30 at night, at 7:32, I got a phone call from a congregant who had lost somebody.
So can you separate? Because that's the thing I wanted to come back to. I mean, is it possible?
It's interesting. We're gonna take a step away from this, and I want to put it in a different context. And I'm sure you've had this too. Often when I talk to people pre-COVID about doing funerals, people tell me, Rabbi, that must be the hardest thing you do. And I've kind of learned over the years, I don't know how you feel about this, but 91% of the time, a funeral is not the hardest thing that I do. It's not my personal loss. I can be empathetic, I can be present, I can bring Jewish tradition. But after the years, I've also learned to separate between what's yours as a mourner and what's mine as a rabbi. And I can be present without experiencing the depth of sadness that somebody else is feeling. Now, there's always those other few percent. Like when I had to do a burial of an 8-month-old when my oldest child was 8 months old.
Right.
I couldn't separate that. I did the funeral, sobbing myself through the funeral. I went to the other side of the cemetery and literally sat in my car for an hour and a half crying. But that's not the norm. But COVID has created a new norm, right? Where it all decided, like you said, it all piles on each other. We're being in here, being rabbis, right? Being there to bring a sense of calm and tradition and connection to people when they need it most. And I'm also in a space where I need it, right? And that phone call comes after a Shiva for my own loss. To answer your question, separation is really hard. Self-care and all of this past year has been something I've had to work really hard on, right? Talking to my therapist about the separations that I need to make, helping Laura help me with the separations I need to make.
I think that, you need to make separation. Sometimes, like, as you rightly observed, you can't make the separation. It comes too close. And also, of course, there are people that rabbis are closer to. I mean, both
of course,
in terms of age and also just number of years of being friends and being having a relationship with them. And so those are obviously more difficult. And when it's a tragic situation, that's also, I think, very painful and almost impossible to make the separation that sometimes, I guess, for our own spiritual and mental health is necessary. But one of the things that has happened because of COVID and in this current circumstance is, I'll say it funny at first, which is, you don't become a rabbi because you don't like standing up in front of large groups of people. Like, you want to be with people. And the only times that we're really with people in this past year has been at funerals, because that's been when we've, had to have people, and everything, all those other sort of people events have been significantly curtailed or early on even prohibited. I mean, back last spring, we were still doing funerals because we had to, but that was it. It was the only time we were being with people. And there's part of, I think 99% of rabbis, and I know you as well, we want to be with people. We like to be with a crowd of people.
Yeah, no, it's we like to be, right. I think as human beings, most of us want some level of connection with other, and there are moments, especially when we need it. And not to make this more complex, but everything we're talking about has taken place in the context of a great physical disconnect from other, and a larger sense of grief and mourning that all of us have shared, because we've had to sort of navigate our way through a life that left the normal that we knew behind. And so we're all dealing with grief at some level, and then all this happens. One of the things that's been really important to me, and I know some out there are going to roll their eyes when they hear it, but Zoom has been my friend. I know Zoom is tiring, it's exhausting, but at least for me, it has allowed me to maintain connection with people in ways that otherwise I couldn't and wouldn't have. And as a rabbi, we talk about working our way through this. And this, you know me, I'm spiritual in a very pragmatic kind of a way. That's kind of my journey through spirituality. But I find Zoom very spiritual. Those Shiva minions. We're out here in California. When I can, and listen, I can't always convince a family to do it, but when I convince a family to have a memorial service or Shiva minion with Zoom, every single one of them has walked away saying, wow, boy, Uncle Harry in New Jersey wouldn't have been here in California if it weren't for Zoom. And all this, like there's like comfort in things. So people, we've had to get through this personally and professionally. I've had to kind of open up avenues that are different than I ever imagined. Like we said, we didn't learn this at HUC. We didn't learn about Zoom. And we certainly didn't learn about how you use Zoom to make connection, to build community, to connect people when they need it most. And it's been a very powerful tool. There's another thing that I've learned to do, and I'm sure you probably have done this too, is during parts of COVID, thankfully not the last months, but during parts of COVID, if someone chose not to do Zoom, they had a private burial with 3 to 5 or 7 people at the graveside. And that became their entire morning ritual, other than phone calls that they might have with loved ones, because they didn't want to gather on Zoom. So part of the work that I've done, right, with all those deaths in our congregation, I always take time to meet with a family when they lose somebody. We do a family meeting beforehand, the funeral, there's set contacts afterwards. But there's 5 or 7 people that I've had to, meet with twice a week for a few weeks. Like their conversation with me became their funeral, right? Their place to process what they didn't have others around them to process, because they needed that connection. And that, on one hand, it's a mitzvah that I feel on, it's filled me up more than the energy I get being in front of that group. But it's also made me incredibly sad that this is what the person gets in a time when they need and deserve so much more.
Yeah, I agree though. Zoom, the ability of Zoom to include relatives and friends who may not have been able to come in from out of town, and in some instances, elderly relatives who shouldn't have come in 2 years ago. Now it's so much easier for them to participate and to be included and to even share. And I have to say, the Shiva minions, it used to be that I would come and I would speak to the family and the mourners, because those are the people I know, and I would lead the service and I would stay for a little while, and I would miss those conversations that people share with the mourners and telling. And now we're all listeners. Yeah. So I have been, in some ways I'm serving as a moderator for this sharing that's happened. And some of the stories are just incredible. Like just, an acquaintance that the family doesn't even know jumps onto the Zoom and tells a story about their loved one.
And it's even more than that, Steve, right? It's not just the telling, but it's a telling face to face. Even I see you right now.
Right.
And even though you have that electronic brick wall behind you.
You don't like it?
It's okay. It flows nicely with your shirt. The colors match nicely. So I'm impressed with that. But it's also about letting each other into our homes and into our space. I mean, Zoom has allowed that. I'm sitting up here in my office and you're sitting, in your home there. And, Zoom has allowed us, even in this difficult time, to be in each other's space, to see each other's space. And I think most significantly, you said it, to see and hear each other. And how you were asking, like, how do we navigate through? For me, that has been a godsend to have that. Is it ideal? I don't think it's ideal, but there's actually elements of it for some families that have worked better than what they might have otherwise had. And there's others who are sitting in great pain right now, waiting for that first moment when I say, let's have that memorial service at the service from, for your mother who died 7 months ago. Like I have families waiting for that because they're not even open to this, and I've had to navigate that conversation. And
I think the difficulty is, because we can't hug right now, and because there's the lack of human, touch and contact, physical contact, which is, I would always put my arms around people and often do at both happy and sad occasions. And the fact that we can't do
yeah,
that
I do miss that, right? I miss that.
and I think that's sustaining for human beings. So before we go to, we do want to talk a little bit about baseball, because I promised you we would talk about your team. Everyone's mourning in a way this year. The paper every single day has on the front page, how many people are sick and how many people have died. So everyone has become a mourner. What can you give some rabbinic advice? I mean, what you've learned and what you can tell people to do?
It's always tough because everyone is different, but I think that telling people, helping people hold the pain, hold the grief, name it, acknowledge it, just admit that it's there and feel it, is part of the process. So often we try to just brush it off and move on to the next thing, or turn the page in the newspaper and find something but just being able to hold it and name it and recognize it for what it is, because for all of us, and I've already shared with you personally, like for all of us, this has been something that we have never experienced before in this way, so naming it, identifying it, letting yourself feel it, and also remembering that no matter how deep the pain is, you're not alone. You're in most cases, hopefully you're part of a family, you're part of a community. You have rabbis and other teachers who care for you, and don't be afraid to let them in. And if you are willing to lean into the Zoom, reach out and connect with others, right? Grief and pain and loss is deeply personal, but the pathway forward in our tradition, right? It's the minyan, right? It's about that connection to other and opening yourself to it, and opening yourself to the warmth, to the hug, to the wisdom, to the silence, to the reality that comes that when you realize that you don't have to go through this alone. So I just, in that there's so many more things we can talk about, but I think that
I think that's
people aren't always good at that. People, they're either not good at the holding it, or they hold it so tightly that they don't let others in.
Yeah.
So it's really both of those go hand. It's about holding it and recognizing that you're part of a community, and part of a family, and part of a network that can help you as you make your way through.
Yeah, I do think that people often feel that they're alone in this grief and in their mourning, but naming it and acknowledging it is extremely important. And we have a tendency in our culture to kind of want to push it aside. I'm talking about our American culture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's just one more thing that I'll add personally is I like to believe, and we'll let others testify to it, but I'd like to believe that this journey that I've been on this past year, through my own grief and being there as rabbi for congregation, will hopefully already has made me a better rabbi, a better husband, a better father, a better individual for having made my way through, holding the grief and getting to the other side. And, I'm sitting here, I'm looking out my windows. Like I said, the foothills are right out there. The sun is shining. There's, we still don't know exactly what normal or new normal is going to look like, but there's some light at the end of the tunnel there. And we just keep like our tradition compels us, like Abraham, to go forward and be a blessing and know that others can be blessed by us as well. And as long as we can stay on that path, I think we'll not just be okay. We'll find a path to goodness and wholeness, which is what I think it's all about.
Nicely said, Alan. I promised you a few sentences about your Chicago Cubs.
My Chicago. So here's the only thing I have to say about the Chicago Cubs right now. We've had a rough start to the season, but the 2 days we've beaten the Mets, And we beat them 3-0, but we killed them like 16-4 yesterday. Javi Baez had a grand slam home run, and the Mets came in hot, and now they have pretty much the same record as the Cubs. So it's early season. Go Cubs, go! And 2016 was just a few years ago, and I'm hoping that we get that World Series, maybe every 5 years instead of every century or two. So hopefully we're on the right path here. Okay, like I said, the lights at the end of the tunnel, and I'm thinking that the series against the Mets is what's going to ignite us and boost us forward. So that's my hope.
All right, I'm gonna leave it with that. Thank you very much. This has been Monday Musings. It's great to see you, Alan.
Great to be with you, Steve. Did you learn technology skills at HEC?
I know. It's like, why can't I get the slide right? Okay, we'll just let it go.
You're still recording?
Yeah.